Marcus Chen stood at the massive viewport of the Galactic Council station, watching the stars stretch across the black canvas of space. His reflection stared back at him, young and nervous, wearing the crisp blue uniform of the Terran Diplomatic Corps. At 24, he was the youngest human ever assigned to represent Earth at the galactic level. The weight of that responsibility pressed down on his shoulders like a physical thing. The station itself was a marvel of alien engineering. Crystalline spires twisted upward like frozen lightning, while organic-looking corridors pulsed with bioluminescent patterns. Representatives from dozens of species moved through the halls, their forms ranging from the ethereal crystalline beings that seemed made of living glass to the massive, scaled Zephyrians who dominated most conversations with their booming voices. Marcus had dreamed of this moment since joining the Diplomatic Corps 3 years ago. Earth had only been granted provisional membership in the Galactic Council 18 months prior, after decades of careful negotiation. The older diplomats back on Earth had told him this assignment was a great honor. Now, as he prepared for his first formal introduction to the Council, he wondered if they had simply sent him because he was expendable. "Ah, the little Terran arrives," came a deep, rumbling voice behind him. Marcus turned to see Ambassador Zephyron, the primary Zephyrian representative. The alien stood nearly 8 feet tall, his scaled skin a deep purple that caught the station's artificial light. Multiple eyes arranged in a crown-like pattern around his elongated skull fixed on Marcus with what seemed like amusement. "Ambassador," Marcus replied, offering the formal bow he had practiced countless times. "I am honored to serve alongside such distinguished representatives." Zephyron's throat sac inflated slightly, a sign Marcus recognized as the Zephyrian equivalent of laughter. "Serve alongside? Oh, little mammal, you misunderstand your position here." Several other aliens had gathered around them now, drawn by the conversation. Marcus recognized the crystalline hegemony's representative, a being that looked like a walking sculpture of blue ice, and delegates from at least 4 other species. "The Council has agreed to allow your species a trial period," continued the crystalline being, its voice like wind chimes in a gentle breeze. "But first you must demonstrate that humans understand proper galactic etiquette. We have prepared a series of cultural orientation exercises for you." Marcus felt his stomach drop. This had not been mentioned in any of his briefings. Cultural orientation exercises. "Oh yes," Zephyron said, his multiple eyes gleaming. "We cannot have a species join our ancient council without proper respect for our traditions. Come, young Terran, your education begins now." They led Marcus to a large ceremonial chamber filled with delegates from across the galaxy. The room buzzed with anticipation, and Marcus realized with growing horror that this was meant to be entertainment. A floating platform had been prepared in the center of the room, clearly designed to put him on display. "First," announced a delegate from the Hive Collective, its insectoid features clicking with each word, "you must demonstrate proper respect for Zephyrian cuisine." A tray was brought forward, containing what looked like writhing purple worms covered in a luminescent slime. Marcus stared at the dish, his training warring with his basic human instincts. The smell alone made his eyes water. Around him, dozens of alien faces watched with obvious amusement. Some were even recording the proceedings with devices that floated around him like mechanical flies. "Is there a problem, Terran?" Zephyron asked, his tone mockingly concerned. "Surely a species that wishes to join our council would not refuse a simple gesture of cultural appreciation." Marcus looked around the room. Every face showed the same expression. They were waiting for him to fail. This was not about cultural appreciation. This was about putting the upstart humans in their place. His hand shook slightly as he reached for the plate, but his voice remained steady. "Of course not, Ambassador. I am honored to participate in your traditions." The worms were still moving when he bit into them. The texture was like biting into a balloon filled with rotten fish, and the taste was somehow even worse. Purple slime ran down his chin as he chewed, fighting every instinct that told him to spit it out. The aliens around him laughed and clicked and buzzed their approval. "Excellent," Zephyron boomed. "Now for proper crystalline formal wear." Another tray appeared, this one carrying what looked like a collection of sharp, translucent shards. The traditional ceremonial crown of respect. Marcus realized with growing dread that they expected him to wear it. The crown was clearly designed for a being with a very different head shape, and several of the crystal points looked genuinely sharp. But dozens of eyes watched him, waiting for any sign of refusal. the crown cut into his scalp as they placed it on his head. He felt warm blood trickle down his forehead, but he kept his expression neutral. The aliens murmured their approval at his willingness to bleed for their traditions. "And now," said the Hive Collective representative, "the traditional dance of submission to welcome a new species into our fold." They forced him to perform a series of movements that were clearly designed to be humiliating. Marcus had to hop on one foot while making chirping sounds, then crawl in a circle while the aliens pelted him with small, sticky fruits that burst on impact. The recording devices captured every moment of his degradation. Through it all, Marcus endured. His face burned with shame, his stomach churned with the alien food, and his head throbbed where the crystal crown cut into his skin. But he completed every ritual they demanded, every humiliating task they presented as cultural appreciation. "Remarkable," Zephyrin said finally, his multiple eyes studying Marcus with what might have been grudging respect. "The little mammal has more endurance than expected. Perhaps humans are not completely worthless after all." The other delegates laughed at this backhanded compliment, and Marcus felt his hands clench into fists, but he forced his expression to remain calm, even grateful. "Thank you, Ambassador. I am honored to learn from such experienced representatives." As the crowd began to disperse, Marcus stood alone on the platform, purple slime still staining his uniform, blood drying on his forehead, and the taste of alien humiliation bitter in his mouth. He had passed their test, but at what cost? He wondered how his predecessors would have handled this situation, and whether any amount of diplomatic training could have prepared him for this level of calculated cruelty. The worst part was knowing that this was only the beginning. He had weeks of assignment ahead of him, and if this was how they treated him on the first day, he could only imagine what other degradations awaited. But Marcus Chen had not come this far to give up now. Earth was counting on him whether they knew it or not. He straightened his shoulders, wiped the blood from his face, and walked back toward his quarters with as much dignity as he could manage. Behind him, he could hear the alien still laughing about the primitive mammal and his amusing performance. Each laugh was like a knife between his shoulder blades, but Marcus did not turn around. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new humiliations, and new tests of his resolve. But he would endure them all, just as he had endured today. Because sometimes representing humanity meant swallowing your pride and showing them that no matter what they threw at you, humans would not break. 3 days had passed since Marcus's humiliating introduction to galactic diplomacy. The cuts on his forehead had healed, leaving only faint scars, but the memory of that first day burned as fresh as ever. He had thrown himself into his work, studying trade agreements and cultural protocols, hoping to prove his worth through competence rather than endurance. The morning started like any other. Marcus sat in his small quarters, reviewing the daily briefing materials on his data tablet. The Galactic Council was discussing a new trade route through the Andromeda Spiral, and Earth desperately wanted to be included in the negotiations. Marcus had spent hours preparing questions and proposals that might demonstrate humanity's potential value to the Council. The door chime interrupted his concentration. "Enter," he called, expecting perhaps a routine delivery or message. Instead, 4 Zephyrian security officers entered his quarters. Their scaled armor gleamed under the artificial lights, and each carried weapons that Marcus recognized as plasma disruptors. Behind them walked Ambassador Zephyron himself, his multiple eyes fixed on Marcus with what looked like grim satisfaction. "Marcus Chen of Terra," Zephyron announced formally, "you are under suspicion of theft of a sacred Zephyrian artifact." Marcus felt the blood drain from his face. He slowly set down his tablet and stood, keeping his hands visible. "I'm sorry, Ambassador, but there must be some mistake. I haven't taken anything." "The scepter of Zefthul has gone missing," one of the security officers said, his voice a low growl. "A priceless relic from our homeworld, thousands of years old. It was last seen in the diplomatic wing where your quarters are located." "That doesn't mean I took it," Marcus protested. "Dozens of beings have access to the diplomatic wing. Why am I being singled out?" Zephyron's throat sac inflated with what Marcus now recognized as cruel amusement. "Your species has a well-documented history of primitive acquisitive behavior. Theft, hoarding, territorial aggression. It is entirely consistent with Terran psychology." "That's not fair," Marcus said, his voice rising despite his efforts to stay calm. "You're stereotyping based on incomplete historical data. Modern humans have evolved far beyond those behaviors." "Have you?" asked the crystalline representative who had apparently arrived during the conversation. Its translucent form seemed to shimmer with cold light. Your species has been in space for barely 2 centuries. Other races have observed your expansion, your claims on systems, your aggressive colonization patterns. The evidence suggests otherwise. Marcus felt trapped. Everything he said seemed to make the situation worse. I'm willing to cooperate with any investigation, but I want it on record that I categorically deny taking anything that doesn't belong to me. Oh, you will cooperate, Zephyron said. You will submit to a complete search of your quarters and your person. You will provide detailed accounting of your movements for the past week, and you will remain under house arrest until this matter is resolved. The security officers moved forward, and Marcus realized he had no choice but to comply. They placed restraint cuffs on his wrists, devices that felt uncomfortably warm against his skin and hummed with some kind of energy field. This is a violation of diplomatic immunity, Marcus said, trying to keep his voice level. Diplomatic immunity applies to recognized diplomats, the crystalline being replied. Your status is provisional at best. The Council has every right to investigate suspected criminal activity among temporary residents. They began searching his quarters with methodical thoroughness. Every drawer was emptied, every storage compartment examined. They scanned his personal belongings with devices that made high-pitched whining sounds. Marcus watched helplessly as they dismantled his carefully organized living space. The security officers found nothing, of course, because there was nothing to find. But their failure to locate the stolen artifact only seemed to increase their suspicion. They began looking in increasingly unlikely places, tearing apart his furniture and examining the walls themselves. Perhaps he has hidden it elsewhere, one officer suggested. Humans are known for their deceptive nature. Or perhaps he has already passed it to an accomplice, added another. They work in packs, these mammals. Marcus bit back his angry response. Anything he said would only be used as further evidence of human duplicity and aggression. He had learned that much from his first day here. The search expanded beyond his quarters. They escorted him through the station corridors and restraints, drawing stares and whispers from other delegates. Marcus had never felt so exposed and humiliated. The message was clear. This is what happens to humans who forget their place. They searched the diplomatic offices where he worked, the cafeteria where he ate, even the observation lounges where he sometimes went to think. At each location, the security officers made a show of their investigation, ensuring that as many beings as possible witnessed the spectacle of the human under suspicion. This is degrading, Marcus said quietly to Zephyrin as they walked between locations. Even if you suspect me, surely there are more discreet ways to handle this investigation. Discretion is earned through trust, Zephyrin replied. Your species has not yet earned that privilege. Besides, transparency and justice serves the greater good. Other beings should see the consequences of criminal behavior. By the end of the day, Marcus had been strip-searched, interrogated, and had every aspect of his life on the station examined and documented. They found nothing because there was nothing to find. But the absence of evidence seemed only to convince his accusers that he was more clever than they had initially suspected. They placed him under house arrest in his quarters, with a guard posted outside his door and monitoring devices installed throughout his living space. He was forbidden from contacting other human diplomats or representatives. His access to the station's communication systems was revoked. For all practical purposes, he was a prisoner. Marcus sat on his bed that night, staring at the stars through his small window. The beauty of space, which had once filled him with wonder and hope, now seemed cold and hostile. He thought about his family back on Earth, who had been so proud when he received this assignment. They probably had no idea what was happening to him here. The worst part was the growing certainty that this was all orchestrated. The missing artifact, the immediate suspicion falling on him, the public nature of the investigation. It all felt too convenient, too perfectly designed to humiliate humanity's representative. But if it was a setup, Marcus had no way to prove it. He thought about the other human diplomats who had come before him and whether they had faced similar challenges. The records were sparse, but he was beginning to suspect that human representatives faced a much harder path than their alien counterparts. A soft chime from his door interrupted his brooding. The guard outside was receiving some kind of communication. Marcus strained to listen, but could only make out muffled voices speaking in languages he didn't recognize. Whatever was being discussed, it didn't sound like good news for him. Marcus closed his eyes and tried to prepare himself for whatever new humiliation tomorrow would bring. He had survived the cultural orientation, and he would survive this too. But each day on the station was testing the limits of his endurance and his faith in the diplomatic process. Outside his window, the stars continued their ancient dance, indifferent to the struggles of one young human trying to represent his entire species in a galaxy that seemed determined to reject them. Marcus watched the stars until exhaustion finally claimed him, and he fell into an uneasy sleep filled with dreams of home and the growing fear that he might never see it again. Marcus had been under house arrest for 5 days when the station's alert system activated. The soft melodic tones that usually announced routine events were replaced by sharp, urgent pulses that seemed to make the very walls vibrate. Through his small window, Marcus could see security patrols moving with unusual urgency through the corridors. His guard, a young Zephyrian officer named Koran, spoke rapidly into his communication device. The officer's scales had shifted to a darker shade, which Marcus had learned indicated anxiety or stress among his species. "What's happening?" Marcus asked through the door's speaker system. "A ship approaches," Koran replied curtly. "Saurian Dominion vessel. The Council has not been expecting any Dominion representatives." Marcus felt a chill run down his spine. The Saurian Dominion was one of the most feared powers in the galaxy. Ancient, proud, and utterly ruthless, they maintained their independence through military might and a reputation for savagery that kept even the most powerful empires at a respectful distance. If a Saurian ship was approaching unannounced, it meant someone was in serious trouble. The alert tones ceased, replaced by an announcement that echoed through the station in the formal council tongue. "All beings are advised that Apex Hunter Kethvar of the Saurian Dominion has requested immediate boarding privileges. Council security protocols are now in effect." Marcus heard Koran's sharp intake of breath. Even through the door he could sense the guard's sudden fear. "Who is Kethvar?" Marcus asked. "The Blood Tracker," Koran whispered, as if speaking the name too loudly might summon the being in question. "The most feared hunter in the galaxy. They say he has never failed to capture his prey. Never." The corridor outside Marcus's quarters fell silent except for the distant hum of the station's life support systems. Marcus pressed his ear to the door, straining to hear any sound that might give him a clue about what was happening. The normal traffic of beings through the diplomatic wing had completely stopped. An hour passed in tense silence. Then Marcus heard the distinctive sound of heavy footsteps approaching down the corridor. They were different from any footfall he had heard on the station before Baru measured. Powerful and somehow predatory, each step seemed to echo with authority and barely contained violence. "By the ancient flames," Koran breathed. "He's coming here." Marcus stepped back from the door as the footsteps stopped directly outside his quarters. He could hear voices speaking in low, urgent tones but could not make out the words. Then the door's locking mechanism disengaged with a soft hiss. The being that entered Marcus's quarters was the most intimidating creature he had ever seen. Kethvar stood 8 feet tall, his muscular frame covered in dark scales that seemed to absorb the room's light. Scars crisscrossed his hide, each one telling the story of a battle survived. His head was elongated and reptilian, with eyes like burning coals set in deep sockets. But it was the armor that truly commanded attention. Ancient Saurian battleplate covered his torso and limbs, crafted from some dark metal that seemed to drink in light. Weapons were integrated into the armor itself. Retractable claws, hidden blades, and what looked like energy projection nodes. This was not just a hunter. This was a living weapon. Behind Kethvar came Ambassador Zephyron and several other council representatives, their faces showing mixtures of fear and poorly concealed excitement. They were clearly expecting this meeting to resolve their human problem once and for all. "This is the one?" Kethvar asked, his voice a deep rumble that seemed to come from somewhere deep in his chest. His eyes fixed on Marcus with an intensity that made the young human feel like prey being evaluated by a predator. "Yes," Zephyron replied quickly. "Marcus Chen of Terra. He stands accused of stealing our sacred scepter. We thought you might assist in recovering the truth." Marcus tried to keep his voice steady as he spoke. "I've already told you I didn't take anything. I've cooperated with every aspect of your investigation." Kethvar's head tilted slightly, studying Marcus from a different angle. The hunter's gaze seemed to pierce right through him, reading something in his posture or expression that others might miss. "You are young," Kethvar observed. "Too young for diplomatic assignment unless your species is desperate or foolish." "Both, probably," Marcus admitted, trying to inject a note of humor into the situation. It felt strange to be making jokes while facing down the galaxy's most feared predator. But somehow the hunter's direct manner was less intimidating than the Council's elaborate cruelty. Something flickered across Kethvar's scarred features. It might have been amusement, though it was hard to tell with Saurian expressions. "Show me your hands," the hunter commanded. Marcus extended his hands, palms up. Kethvar examined them closely, noting the calluses and small scars that marked Marcus as someone who had done physical work. "These are not the hands of a thief," Kethvar said finally. "These are soldiers' hands." "Warriors' hands," Zephron's throat sac inflated with confusion. "Surely you're mistaken. This is a young diplomat barely out of training." But Kethvar had moved closer, his burning eyes now fixed intently on Marcus's face. The hunter reached up and carefully pushed aside a strand of Marcus's hair, revealing a small scar near his temple that had been hidden. "Plasma burn," Kethvar said softly. "Recent, within the last 3 years." Marcus felt his heart racing. The scar was from his military service, from a battle he had tried very hard to forget. He had never mentioned his combat experience in his diplomatic files, partly because it wasn't relevant to his current assignment, and partly because those memories were too painful to discuss. "You were in the Void War," Kethvar continued, his voice now carrying a note of something that might have been respect. "Outer Rim conflicts. Hard fighting. Yes," Marcus admitted. "I served before joining the diplomatic corps." The other council representatives looked confused. This was clearly not the information they had expected to hear about their prisoner. Kethvar stood back, his posture subtly shifting. Where before he had loomed over Marcus like a predator sizing up prey, now he stood differently. There was still danger in his stance, but it was the danger of a fellow warrior rather than an executioner. "What was your unit?" Kethvar asked. "Terran Marine Expeditionary Force, 3rd Battalion," Marcus replied. He wasn't sure why he was answering so readily, but something about the hunter's direct questioning style made evasion seem pointless. "3rd Battalion," Kethvar repeated slowly. They were at Kepler 442. Marcus felt the room temperature seem to drop. "Yes, we were there. The Battle of..." Kepler 442 had been one of the bloodiest engagements of the Void War. A refugee convoy carrying civilians from 6 different species had been trapped by raiders in an asteroid field. The rescue operation had turned into a nightmare of close-quarters combat in zero gravity, fighting through mining tunnels and improvised fortifications. "I was there too," Kethvar said quietly. The silence that followed this revelation was broken only by the soft hum of the station's life support systems. Marcus stared at the massive hunter, his mind racing back to those terrible 3 days in the asteroid field. He remembered Saurian forces arriving near the end of the battle, turning the tide when human casualties had become almost unsustainable. "You remember," Kethvar observed, reading Marcus's expression. "I remember Saurian ships arriving," Marcus said slowly. "I remember thinking we were about to get caught between 2 different enemies. But you attacked the raiders instead of us." "Not my decision," Kethvar replied. "I was leading ground forces, hunting the raider commanders through the tunnels." He paused, his burning eyes never leaving Marcus's face. "I remember a young human soldier who fought beside me for 3 days straight. Never gave his real name. Disappeared after the battle before proper honors could be given." Marcus felt the blood drain from his face. Those 3 days were burned into his memory like a brand. The fighting had been so chaotic, so desperate, that normal military protocols had broken down completely. Human and Saurian forces had worked together out of sheer necessity, sharing ammunition and medical supplies, covering each other's flanks against an enemy that showed no mercy. "That soldier saved my life," Kethvar continued, his voice carrying an edge of something that might have been emotion. "Dragged me to cover when plasma fire took out my leg armor. Held position while I regenerated enough to fight again." The council representatives were staring now, clearly realizing that this meeting was not proceeding according to their expectations. "You're mistaken," Marcus said weakly. "I'm just a diplomat." But Kethvar was removing something from his armor. It was a small device, scarred and blackened, that Marcus recognized with a shock of memory. "This is a human medical injector," the hunter said. "The soldier gave it to me when my regeneration systems were failing. Old Earth tech, designed for human physiology, but it stabilized me long enough for my own healing to take over." Marcus stared at the device. He remembered giving away his last emergency medical kit to a wounded Saurian warrior, knowing it probably wouldn't work, but hoping it might buy enough time for the alien's natural healing abilities to kick in. "I have been searching for that warrior for 3 years," Kethvar said softly, "to honor a debt that can never be repaid." The room had become completely silent. Marcus could hear his own heartbeat in his ears as the implications of this rev. The silence in the room stretched on for what felt like an eternity. Marcus stared at the medical injector in Kethvar's massive clawed hand, memories flooding back like a dam bursting. The asteroid tunnels, the screaming of plasma weapons, the smell of burned metal and worse things. And through it all, fighting beside creatures he had been trained to fear, united only by their determination to save the innocent. "You were calling yourself something else," Kethvar said slowly, his burning eyes never leaving Marcus's face. "A false name." "Chen was my mother's name," Marcus admitted quietly. "My military service was under my father's name. Marcus Webb." "Webb," Kethvar repeated, and something like satisfaction crossed his scarred features. "Yes, Corporal Marcus Webb, the human who refused to retreat even when his unit was cut off, who shared his last ration pack with wounded Saurian warriors." Ambassador Zephyron's throat sac was fluttering with confusion and growing alarm. "This is impossible. You're saying this thief is some kind of war hero?" But Kethvar had begun removing his ceremonial war mask, a gesture that made several of the council representatives step backward in shock. Saurian hunters never removed their masks in the presence of other species. It was considered either an act of supreme trust or a prelude to ritual combat. The face beneath the mask was as scarred as the rest of him, but there was something in his expression that Marcus recognized. It was the same look he had seen in those dark tunnels when they had worked together to save civilians neither of them had ever met before. "Not a thief," Kethvar said, his voice carrying a resonance that seemed to fill the entire room. "A battle brother, one who has shed blood beside me in the service of innocence." He reached into his armor again and withdrew something that made Marcus's breath catch in his throat. It was a small piece of metal, twisted and blackened by plasma fire, but still recognizable as part of a human combat helmet. "I kept this," Kethvar explained, "from the tunnel where you dragged me to safety." A reminder of courage shown by one who owed me nothing. Marcus remembered that moment. His helmet had been cracked by debris, and he had discarded the damaged piece before entering the final assault on the raider stronghold. He had never imagined that the Saurian warrior would keep it. "You searched for me," Marcus said, not quite able to believe it. "For 3 years," Kethvar confirmed, asking questions, following rumors. "Your government kept military records sealed, even from allies. They said Corporal Webb had retired from service but gave no details of his current location or identity." "I did retire," Marcus said. "After Kepler 442, I couldn't continue fighting. Too many good people died in those tunnels." "Death in battle is honorable," Kethvar replied, "but choosing to serve peace instead of war is also honorable. You became a diplomat to build bridges instead of burning them." The council representatives were exchanging worried glances now. This was clearly not the outcome they had expected when they summoned the galaxy's most feared hunter. "This changes nothing," the crystalline representative said, its voice like breaking glass. "The accusation of theft still stands. Past military service does not excuse present crimes." Kethvar's head turned toward the crystalline being with a movement so sharp and predatory that the translucent creature actually took a step backward. "You accuse my battle brother of theft," the hunter said, his voice dropping to a dangerous growl. "You will provide proof of this accusation now. We have circumstantial evidence," Zephyron stammered. "The artifact disappeared from the diplomatic wing where he has quarters. His species has a history of acquisitive behavior." "Circumstantial evidence," Kethvar repeated slowly. "And you base your accusation on stereotypes about his species." The hunter's claws had begun to extend slightly, scraping against his armor plates. "This is not justice. This is prejudice." "The investigation is ongoing," another council representative said quickly. "We are following proper procedures." "Your procedures," Kethvar said, his burning eyes sweeping across the assembled aliens. seemed designed to humiliate rather than illuminate truth. He looked back at Marcus. "Tell me about their investigation, Battle Brother." Marcus felt strange hearing himself called by that title, but there was something oddly comforting about it. For the first time since arriving at the station, someone was treating him as an equal rather than a curiosity or a threat. "They've searched everything I own," Marcus said. "My quarters, my office, every place I've been on the station. They've found nothing because there's nothing to find. But they continued to hold me under house arrest based on assumptions about human nature." "I see," Keithvar said thoughtfully. "And have they searched the quarters and possessions of other beings who had access to this missing artifact?" The silence that followed this question was deeply telling. "The artifact was stolen from a secure area," Zephyrin said defensively. "Only senior diplomatic staff had access." "Then search them all," Keithvar said simply. "If you truly seek justice rather than a convenient scapegoat, investigate all possibilities equally." "You don't understand," the crystalline being protested. "The other delegates are established members of the council. Their integrity is not in question. But the integrity of my battle brother is?" Keithvar's voice had become deadly quiet. "The warrior who risked his life to save beings he had never met, who gave his own medical supplies to wounded enemies, who fought for 3 days straight to protect refugee ships. His integrity is in question, but theirs is not." Marcus watched the expressions of the council representatives as the implications of Keithvar's words sank in. For the first time since this ordeal began, they looked uncertain, even worried. "The Saurian Dominion has a treaty of mutual respect with the Galactic Council," Keithvar continued, his tone now carrying the weight of official diplomatic authority. "That treaty guarantees fair treatment for all beings under council jurisdiction. I am here to ensure that treaty is honored." "This is an internal council matter," Zephyrin protested weakly. "It became a Dominion matter the moment you accused my battle brother," Keithvar replied. "In Saurian culture, an attack on one's battle brother is an attack on oneself. You will conduct a proper investigation, examining all suspects equally, or you will face the consequences of treaty violation." The threat was unmistakable, and everyone in the room knew that the Saurian Dominion's idea of consequences for treaty violations was not something the council wanted to experience. "Of course," the crystalline being said quickly, "we will expand our investigation to ensure complete thoroughness. All possibilities will be examined." "Good," Keithvar said. He turned back to Marcus and his expression softened slightly. "You will no longer be confined to quarters. You are under my protection now, battle brother." "I don't understand," Marcus said. "Why would you do this for me?" Keithvar was quiet for a moment, considering his words. "In the tunnels of Kepler 442, you showed me that honor transcends species. That courage is not defined by the shape of one's body or the planet of one's birth. You fought not for glory or territory, but to protect those who could not protect themselves." The hunter paused, his scarred features showing something that might have been deep emotion. "You saved my life, yes, but more than that, you showed me that the universe still contains beings worth saving. In a galaxy full of those who take what they want through force or deception, you chose to give. That is why I have searched for you. That is why I call you brother." Marcus felt his eyes beginning to water, though whether from relief or emotion he could not say. For days he had felt alone and helpless, surrounded by beings who seemed determined to see him fail. Now suddenly, he had an ally whose reputation was so fearsome that even the most arrogant council members would think twice before crossing him. "Thank you," Marcus said simply. "Thank me when we have uncovered the truth," Keithvar replied. "And when those responsible for this deception face justice." He looked around the room at the assembled council representatives. "Real justice, not the mockery you have shown my battle brother thus far." The council members began filing out of the room, their previous confidence replaced by obvious nervousness. They had summoned a hunter expecting him to solve their human problem. Instead, they had gained a powerful enemy, and an investigation that might expose their own prejudices. As the last of them left, Keithvar turned back to Marcus. "Tell me everything that has happened since you arrived here, brother. Every detail, no matter how small. If someone has conspired against you, we will find them." For the first time since arriving at the station, Marcus felt hope beginning to replace despair. He was no longer alone in this fight. Elation sank in. The investigation that followed Keithvar's intervention was unlike anything the Galactic Council had ever seen. The legendary hunter approached, the mystery of the missing scepter with the same methodical precision he used to track prey across star systems. Marcus watched in fascination as Kethavar examined every detail of the diplomatic wing with senses far keener than any security scanner. The Saurian's nostrils flared as he tested scent trails. His claws scraped softly against surfaces as he felt for microscopic traces, and his burning eyes noticed details that others had missed completely. Your investigation was flawed from the beginning, Kethavar told the assembled council security team. You assumed guilt and worked backward to find evidence. A true hunter follows the trail wherever it leads. Ambassador Zephyron's throat sac fluttered nervously. We followed standard council procedures. The evidence pointed to the human. The evidence pointed to someone wanting you to think it was the human, Kethavar corrected.
Very different things. The hunter had insisted that all diplomatic quarters be searched with the same thoroughness that Marcus's had received.
The council representatives had objected strenuously, citing privacy rights and diplomatic immunity, but Kethavar's reminder about treaty obligations had been persuasive. Marcus accompanied Kethavar during the searches, partly as a witness and partly because the hunter claimed his battle brother's perspective might prove valuable. It was during the search of the senior Zephyrian delegates' quarters that they found the first real clue. Interesting, Kethavar murmured, examining a small cleaning device. This unit has been used recently to remove organic traces, but why would a being who employs professional cleaning services need such a device? The device's memory banks revealed that it had been used to clean something that contained traces of rare metals and energy signatures. When they compared those signatures to the missing scepter, the match was exact. Councillor Vexthal, Kethavar said to the senior Zephyrian delegate, please explain why your personal cleaning device contains residue from the missing scepter. Vexthal's scales had shifted to a pale, sickly color. This is clearly some kind of setup. Perhaps the human planted evidence in my quarters. Marcus has been under constant surveillance since the theft was reported, Kethavar replied calmly. He has had no opportunity to plant anything anywhere. Also, this device was used 2 days before the theft was even discovered. The investigation continued with relentless efficiency. Kethavar tracked financial records, communication logs, and movement patterns, with a skill that left the council's own security forces looking incompetent by comparison. The breakthrough came when the hunter discovered anomalies in the station's internal shipping records. Someone had arranged for a package to be sent from the diplomatic wing to a private freight company the day after the scepter disappeared. The package was logged as containing cultural artifacts for academic study, Kethavar explained to the hastily assembled council leadership. It was shipped to a private collector known for acquiring items of questionable provenance. When they traced the shipping authorization, it led directly back to Councillor Vexthal. This proves nothing, Vexthal insisted, his voice rising in pitch. Anyone could have used my authorization codes. True, Kethavar agreed. But when combined with the cleaning device residue, the financial records showing payment from that same collector, and the surveillance footage of you accessing the secure storage area, it paints a clear picture. The surveillance footage was damning. It showed Vexthal entering the storage area during a shift change, when coverage was minimal. The timestamp corresponded exactly with when the scepter had last been confirmed present. You stole your own people's sacred artifact, Marcus said, unable to keep the disgust out of his voice, and you tried to frame me for it. The scepter is worth millions on the private market, Vexthal said, his composure finally cracking. My family's debts. I had no choice. And when suspicion needed to fall somewhere, the human was the obvious target. No one would question it. No one except a battle brother who knows honor when he sees it, Kethavar said coldly. The arrest of Vexthal sent shockwaves through the council. The revelation that a senior member had not only committed theft but had deliberately framed an innocent being created a crisis of credibility that reached the highest levels of galactic government. Marcus found himself summoned to an emergency session of the full council, where beings who had ignored or mocked him just days before now offered formal apologies. The contrast was almost surreal. The council extends its deepest regrets for the miscarriage of justice, announced the prime arbitrator, an ancient being whose species Marcus had never seen before. Human Representative Chen has been fully vindicated of all charges. Furthermore, continued the crystalline representative, its voice notably more respectful than before, We acknowledge that our investigation was tainted by prejudicial assumptions about human nature. This was unacceptable, but it was Kethvar who truly changed the Council's perspective on humanity. The hunter had requested permission to address the assembly, and his words carried weight that no human diplomat could have matched. "I have fought beside humans in battle," Kethvar told the gathered delegates. "I have seen their courage when facing impossible odds. At Kepler 442, human forces continued fighting long after any rational being would have retreated. They did not fight for conquest or glory. They fought to protect refugee ships carrying children they had never met." The hunters' burning eyes swept across the assembly. When their own casualties became severe, they shared their medical supplies with wounded Saurian warriors. When their ammunition ran low, they gave what remained to others and continued fighting with improvised weapons. This is not the behavior of a primitive or selfish species. Marcus watched the faces of the council members as Kethvar spoke. For the first time since arriving at the station, he saw something other than amusement or contempt in their expressions. He saw the beginning of respect. "The warrior I fought beside has chosen the path of diplomacy over war," Kethvar continued. "He seeks to build bridges between species that have never learned to trust each other. This is not weakness. This is strength of a kind that many older species have forgotten." When Kethvar finished speaking, the council chamber was silent for a long moment. Then the Prime Arbitrator spoke again. "In light of recent events and new understanding of human character, the Council extends an unprecedented offer. Earth's provisional membership is hereby converted to full permanent status, with all rights and privileges thereof." Marcus felt his knees go weak. Full membership was what Earth had been working toward for decades. It meant access to advanced technologies, protection under Council law, and a voice in galactic affairs. "Additionally," the Prime Arbitrator continued, "we formally apologize to the human people for the treatment their representative has received. Such prejudicial behavior does not reflect the values this council claims to uphold." After the formal session ended, Marcus found himself surrounded by delegates who had previously avoided him. They asked questions about human culture, military service, and diplomatic goals. The tone of these conversations was completely different from his first day on the station. "It's remarkable how quickly attitudes can change," Marcus observed to Kethvar later, as they shared a meal in the station's main dining area. "Fear changes to respect when strength is demonstrated," the hunter replied. "But more importantly, ignorance changes to understanding when truth is revealed. They thought they knew what humans were. You showed them they were wrong. We showed them," Marcus corrected. "I never could have proven my innocence without your help." Kethvar studied him with those burning eyes. "You proved your innocence by being who you are, battle brother. Honor cannot be faked or hidden. I simply made sure others could see what was already there." As their conversation continued, Marcus noticed other delegates approaching their table. Not to mock or test him this time, but to genuinely engage with both the human diplomat and the legendary Saurian hunter who had vouched for him. For the first time since arriving at the station, Marcus felt that he truly belonged here, not as a curiosity or a token representative, but as an equal among equals. The prejudices that had made his first days so miserable had not completely disappeared, but they had been shaken by the revelation of his military service and Kethvar's testimony about human courage. "What will you do now?" Marcus asked Kethvar. "Your search is over. You found the warrior you were looking for. Now I have gained a battle brother," Kethvar replied. "In Saurian culture, such bonds are permanent. When you need aid, you call on me. When I need counsel, I call on you. This is the way of warriors who have shed blood together." Marcus extended his hand and Kethvar clasped it in his massive clawed grip. The gesture drew attention from across the dining area, as beings of many species witnessed the formal acknowledgement of brotherhood between human and Saurian. "I won't forget this," Marcus said. "Any of it. The humiliation, the false accusations, but most of all your faith in me when no one else would listen. Use it all," Kethvar advised. "The pain will make you stronger. The injustice will make you wiser, and the knowledge that you have allies will give you courage for the challenges ahead."